You're listening to On Shifting Ground. I'm Ray Suarez. When President Trump incited his followers to storm the U.S. Capitol, he punctured a 220-year-old tradition in the United States of America. And while he's beginning to face multiple trials for his norm-busting actions in office, the country still hasn't healed. Since the 2021 attack, conspiracists have grown more suspicious of our political institutions. White supremacists have become more emboldened. And the culture itself sometimes feels like it's about to explode.
We are here at the Supreme Court tonight ahead of what could be a seismic shift.
82-year-old Paul Pelosi was struck on the head and torso.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
For New York Times columnist Thomas Byrne Edsall, this deep-seated contempt for American institutions threatens to send the country over a cliff. In his new book, The Point of No Return, American Democracy at the Crossroads, Edsall documents how Trump's paranoid presidency has inspired his followers to question and attack long-established social and political norms. Edsall explains how demographic shifts, a rural-urban divide, and shifting political parties have left us all in a state of unchecked mistrust and hostility. In July, I spoke with Thomas Edsall at the Commonwealth Club of California in front of a live audience. It was great to be asked to moderate this conversation tonight because I am a never-miss-it reader of Tom Edsall's column, and revisiting the last 5 years through the pages of this book was kind of wonderful and sobering because it was like watching time-lapse photography. If you've ever seen a camera focused on one place and it quickly revs through the seasons and suns rise and set and water rises and falls and trees lose their leaves and then they bud out again, and suddenly all in one place were these crazy 5 years. And I wondered whether some of the concern about democracy wasn't a touch hyperbolic. And then I didn't wonder so much anymore. You pulled me back, you pulled me forth, because our institutions are strong. They hold, even under a tremendous amount of stress. We have one of the oldest constitutional orders on the planet. The Constitution was signed around the same time as the French Revolution, and they're on their fifth republic. We have a long-standing political order in this country. Why are you so worried about where things stand, and what's different about now?
I think really what happened is that the Republican Party, starting really in 1968 with the Richard Nixon campaign and the recognition that there was a silent majority out there, knew that there was a kind of a angry constituency that could be tapped into. And they learned how to tap into that, always staying within the confines of certain limits. They didn't want to really awaken this giant. They just wanted to awaken it on election day. And what they did was to use wedge issues. You saw this with Nixon, with crime, with Newt Gingrich, with angry white men, Reagan with the Reagan Democrats, the lady who gets food stamps in line, and Lee Atwater with the Willie Horton material. It was clearly a play on trying to tap into this, but not to let it really flower. Donald Trump changed that. When he ran, he no longer accepted this kind of implicit boundary that people like George Bush, John McCain, Romney, George H.W. Bush, even Reagan, all of them stayed within this boundary. Trump came in and he basically was willing to render that asunder. And he successfully did that, and he just opened up the gates. He simultaneously converted the Republican Party from an establishment party to a working class party. In many ways, you could say that he democratized the Republican Party by giving voice to the actual majority of voters. But he did so in a way that cracked open and brought out the worst of this constituency's resentments and angers, and he directed them in a fashion that was really dangerous. And I think he has pushed the margins. And if you look at the Republican Party and the Republican Party only, this point of going past a turning point, I think they are very close to that turning point, if not past it. You can't say that about the whole American electorate because of independents and Democrats and because some Republicans are still not there. But the majority of Republicans are pretty close to, if not over the edge. And although I'm reluctant to give credit to any one person when you have a system like this, Trump really was an actor of major proportions in this process.
We have had iconoclastic politicians before, norm-busting politicians, non-nicety observing politicians before. Was there something different about America by the time 2016 rolls around that makes it possible for a campaign like that to succeed where they've been marginal or minority tastes in the past?
Yes, I mean, you had people like George Wallace, you had Pat Buchanan in the past, who actually did appeal to a lot of very similar people as Trump has. Something has been going on, and I'm not sure. Some of this, I have to say, is the responsibility of liberalism. Liberalism has pushed the margins in many ways for many voters beyond the point where they can really accept it. The anger at political correctness, many voters, not just white working class voters, but many voters find it hard to take the burden of having to live under a liberal regime in terms of what you can say, the jokes you can make at work, just your general lifestyle. That's only one aspect of many. But I think that this has been building up. But to be honest, I don't know why it suddenly burst at this point, except for Trump. If it's been there all along, if Trump had come along in 1968, would he have been able to do this? I don't think so. But something clearly has been building. And I think a lot of it has to do with the isolation and the separation of rural America from urban America, the growing intensity and the polarization where voters now are what political scientists call consistent. They hold the same. If you're a Republican, you hold conservative views in general. You hold conservative views right down the line. If you're a liberal, a Democrat, you hold liberal views right down the line. So there's become a real antagonism between the two. This has created a kind of tribal contest that did not exist when there were many more voters who basically were cross-pressured. There were anti-abortion Democrats, there were pro-civil rights Republicans. That prevented the formation of clear adversaries. And Trump came along at a time when the idea of clear adversaries had become built into the system in a way that just had been building. The other thing is that this concept of identity has been developed that they call affective identity or affective polarization, where you're not so much opposed to someone because of their beliefs, but because you believe they are threatening you and your identity. This is one of the things that has happened as people have developed these two clear bodies of opinion, left and right. The people on the left see the right, and the people on the right see the left as threatening not just policies that they believe in, but their very being. I mean, a woman who believes that her choice on abortion is essential to her ability to fulfill her role in life. It sees Republicans as threatening with their stance on abortion, not just taking a bad policy, but as actually defying her ability to achieve what she wants to achieve in life and what her daughters will be able to achieve in life. It's a very different sense, and this is what they call two people I would name, Nishanto Iyengar at Stanford and Liliana Masson at Johns Hopkins, have developed this idea of affective polarization. very effectively to show how this really changes the nature of politics into something that's embedded in the person. It goes beyond just what we know as identity politics to sort of your very being is at stake. And an election then takes on this importance of the outcome that it didn't have before. It used to be if Republicans won, too bad, a Democrat would say next time around. Now, a lot of people can't sleep. I can't tell you the number of people I know who say that even when George Bush was in office, George W. Bush, they couldn't sleep at night. It just kept them awake. And I'm sure that was true on this other side in the case of Obama. I think this is happening more and more.
One of the time-lapse stories that very much does have an arc that comes through loud and clear in this book. In the early chapters, there's speculation about what Trump will do. Will he really do these things he says that he wants to do? What will he mean to the office? And as we go through the chapters, your view, your understanding of what he's really up to in his MO starts to sharpen. What conclusions did you make after it was all over? Did you see some of that coming?
For me, early on with Trump, there were two insights that I got from people that I talked with, especially a guy named Jonathan Haidt, who has written a lot on the psychological thing. One, I had never heard of this concept. Everyone here may have, but I was ignorant of it. The idea of reactance, the idea that sometimes people hear things like political correctness stuff, and they just react, and they're angry, and they become opposed automatically. And the role that reactance plays in politics, and especially for the Trump voter. The other thing where it's suddenly, I hadn't even writing about American politics for 40 years. The idea of authoritarianism in America had never crossed my mind. And at one point, Trump's rhetoric and the kind of things he was calling for suddenly began to click as authoritarian. In their direction, they're edging towards authoritarianism, which really, I remember the first time writing the word authoritarian in a column, and I was really surprised at myself and surprised that this concept was there. And that's what led up to this. Then getting to Trump at the end of his administration through January 6th and the past, the idea that this guy could impose his big lie on the whole country, and roughly, I think by my estimation, 75 million Republican voters say they agree with his big lie, even though it has been proven wrong and all the court decisions and everything else, is just an incredible phenomenon. And I'm trying to understand how such a large body of the American electorate could be persuaded to hold such false and incorrect views. And that's where I think we're in danger of a tipping point, to get back to the book title, because that's the point where you don't need a majority to really corrupt a country. And you can look at Europe leading up to the Second World War, Italy, Germany, the kind of factions that developed didn't start with a majority. They started with a block of voters and then capitalized on and they pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. What's striking is how little pushback there is even among Republicans who know better, leaders in the House and Senate, especially in the Senate, where Mitch McConnell knows better, John Thune knows better. They know it's bullshit, and they're not willing to say that, and they also know that their party is playing with fire, and they're not willing to really stand up to it. So that you don't have to have a majority of the party when there is such a strong bloc that leaders like those are unwilling to put their necks out and challenge it.
I could make a case for that election and its aftermath, demonstrating the solidity of our institutions, or easily make the opposite case. Donald Trump called Arizona Governor Ducey while Governor Ducey was signing the instruments that confirmed the outcome of the 2020 election in his state. He looked at the phone, saw who it was. The ringtone was "Hail to the Chief." He put the phone down and didn't answer it. Brad Raffensperger, the chief electoral officer of the state of Georgia, was on the phone with Donald Trump for over 90 minutes. Here's the most powerful man in the world yelling at you down the phone. He didn't budge. An alternate slate of electors wasn't sent to Washington from Pennsylvania, as was feared. The thing worked, but do you come out of there thinking, well, we were lucky? Or is there enough resilience in the system?
Well, since then, a lot of the legitimate election officials in the country, a lot of them have resigned their jobs. And they are being replaced in many cases by really pro-Trump appointees. Secondly, a number of states have switched the power to decide who won the election from election bureaucrats to the state legislatures. I think it's about 12 or so states have done that.
Most notably Texas.
Texas. And Texas is now trying to take away the power in Houston, the elections officials of Houston, to decide who won the election in Houston, to count the votes. So there's a lot of potential for more mischief, and mischief that has legislative backing to it, than there was before. Now, the problem for Republicans is most of those states where they've done this were already going to vote for Trump anyway. So it's not as if he's gained something that would add to his electoral college vote in 2024. But it does increases the aura of corruption that is potential to be there. And if Democrats begin doubting the legitimacy of the outcome of elections and join Republicans, then we've got a real problem where both parties share a dubious view of what's happening. And polling showed that very briefly during the January 20th and the lead up to it process, a lot of Democrats were saying to pollsters that they would be willing to support violent responses if Trump were able to succeed pushing that argument.
Let me change direction a little bit. I wonder if you think the way people who do what you do for a living use different lenses when they cover Republicans and Democrats, their challenges and chances as political parties. When Republicans do something that's unusual or counterintuitive, it's not hard to find a columnist or even a reporter saying, they're so crafty, they must have something up their sleeve, even if it looks like it's just odd. Yeah. I'm searching for a neutral adjective. When Democrats win, it's not that hard to find columnists who will write things that are headlined, "Once again, Democrats in disarray." There seems to be a kind of home team coverage among reporters that holds Democrats to a different standard for success, for failure, for selling their national programs, for all kinds of things that political parties do.
To some extent, I think you're right. Democrats are always in disarray, so it's not as if they...
So it's a safe headline.
It's a safe headline. But I think where the press has had trouble in dealing with the Democratic Party is where liberalism has gone too far and pushed over the edge. The problems that liberalism has had in addressing questions from transgender issues to homelessness, and I'm not saying that they should be addressed from a conservative point of view, but they have tended to address these issues in ways that alienate middle America voters. And I think the press on these issues tends to be tied in with the Democratic Party and liberal in the sense on these social issues in a way that it doesn't recognize the scope of anger that is being provoked. I remember following the debate in New York over should contraceptives be distributed at junior high schools. Kids are in the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, basically 12 to 14. And the reporting was generally had the tone of, why not? Because this will cut back on pregnancies, it will cut back on sexually transmitted diseases. It's a very reasonable policy to adopt, but they never conveyed the notion, and I don't share this view, but it's there, that the Catholic critics and others have, that it's not the function of the state to do things that really shape, grant approval to sexual activity. By giving out contraceptives, they're suggesting that the state sanctions sexual activity among the 12-year-olds in the schools. Now, that view just didn't come across in the stories. And I think there's a legitimate concern about that on the right, that the liberal press as such is liberal on these issues and does not understand why they would hold these views. And I say that as someone who is pretty liberal on all these subjects, but who, in going around, when I used to do a lot more of this door-to-door talking to people, you really learn a lot that there are very decent people who have concerns that are just not recognized.
I got to tell you, I think that's a legitimate debate to have, an important debate to have. And in the process of the debate, people on all sides of the question would hear information that might temper their views on an issue. So the press might be failing them, but I wonder also whether politics is failing as the place where we work some of this stuff out. Because you can't hear a nuanced debate on Capitol Hill about some of these critical questions about our daily lives and the lives we share with each other. It's really hard to hear anything that isn't almost lampoonish coming from all sides of the aisle about the other people. So they argue with each other, but they don't really make a compelling case for the thing that they're up there in the well talking in favor of.
What's happened is, to some extent, that a person who tries to do what you describe faces potential censure and sanction from his own party. And you could take the case in Florida. Charlie Crist was the Republican governor of Florida. He ran for the Senate against Marco Rubio. One of the things that cost Charlie Crist the election was that when Obama came down after a hurricane had damaged Florida, Crist appeared with him at an event and put his arm around Obama. This picture then was used showing to Republicans, showing, here's a guy who sold you out. Sold you out, he basically was thanking the guy that was sending a whole lot of money and aid to Florida, but it was used in a way that was very damaging to Crist. Now, that kind of thing happens all the time. The rule now in politics is, if you're in the middle of the road, you're roadkill. That's where the cars just drive right over the armadillos that you find in Texas. And so that pushes everybody to the left or to the right, depending on their party. And the whole primary system has gotten very corrupt in this sense, that it really pushes both parties farther and farther away. And polarization itself, they found that the best way to mobilize your voters on your side is to make them as angry and fearful as possible. That means demonizing the other side. The way to win is to polarize more. So you have all kinds of forces pushing people farther and farther apart, and that middle area just gets left empty. And no one wants to be in the middle there.
Tom Edsall, we have some excellent questions from the floor here at the Commonwealth Club. If Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, do you think the Republican Party would have continued on a Trumpist path or on a more regular Republican path?
That's a good question. The question is, how much did Trump, during that process of getting the nomination and then running against Hillary, how much did he change the Republican Party? I think he substantially changed the Republican Party in awakening these white working class voters who had really been the soldiers and not the generals under the old establishment. And they became aware that they had power. Hillary also would have brought out the worst in all Republicans in Congress. McConnell would have used every inch of his power in the Senate, and Republicans in the House would have done the same to demonize her and block her at every possible way. If Hillary was in there, and if she had a Supreme Court, now I don't know how fast pretty early in Trump's term, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. If that happened under Hillary, what would McConnell have done if he was in charge of the Senate? I don't know.
There's been an alarming recent decline in trust in our public schools. Do you see that as part of the same Trumpian trends or something different?
Well, I think it's more actually as much DeSantis in a way and as much a broader Republican. Republicans recognized that they had an issue with Glenn Youngkin got elected in Virginia against Terry McAuliffe, sort of a kingmaker in the Democratic Party. Youngkin ran against public education that was abandoning merit testing in at least one big school, and second, critical race theory being used, and gender fluid issues in schools. All of those Youngkin ran on, and he won. And that, I think, opened the door for the Republican Party, and they have been pushing that more and more, and it fits in also with their efforts to expand vouchers and choice to include private schools. So it fits a larger strategy, the more you can discredit public schools. So I wouldn't really give Trump certainly not full credit. I think there is a real movement within the Republican Party, and I think it's going to accelerate. You have these Moms for Liberty is gaining some strength. You have problems here in California and in other places where the Muslim community has emerged as a conservative force in public education on these exact same issues. So there clearly is a mobilization potential, and Republicans are not going to leave that sitting there going to waste. They're going to do what they can to make hay on that.
You accuse media of not doing enough due diligence on Trump. Would you say they did a fair job on Joe Biden?
I wish I knew more about the whole Hunter Biden situation. And it's not just Hunter Biden. There's a brother named James, I believe, who also worked with Hunter. And they made a lot of money lots of money, I'm talking millions of dollars, with contracts from foreign governments during and after Biden's tenure as vice president. I think that's an area that is certainly going to be explored more by Republicans, but they do such a lousy job on the Republican side with their investigations, calling up sleazy witnesses that are beyond sleazy, that are really, they're so incompetent when they in fact have, I think, something that might be worthwhile looking at, but they turn it into grandiose schemes of the Biden family, including Joe Biden, engaging in multi-million-dollar scams. And they reach that conclusion before the evidence is anywhere near in. But I think the Hunter Biden thing does not look good to me, and it would look, in normal circumstances, It's pretty sleazy. I began reporting in national reporting in 1974. At that time, Watergate was a big scandal, but Democratic scandals were absolutely fair game. And the way to get ahead for a reporter was to knock off a politician of either party. If you got a scalp, you moved up the ladder. Nowadays, I think there's much more partisan consideration that goes into that kind of thinking. And I don't see any mainstream publication going after the Biden family's activities in the way that they might otherwise.
What's the best piece of professional advice that you've received, and who was it from?
One of them was from David Broder, who I worked with at the Washington Post for many years and was the dean of the political press corps. He always said that the best thing to do was to go out and go door to door in a neighborhood, and he would always try to pick a neighborhood or places that where the vote swung back and forth, not an entirely Democratic place or a Republican place. And I think he was right on. I learned more doing door-to-door canvassing. I remember going to the Inland Empire here in this state and learning tons from people about their views, what really angered them, all kinds of things that were not even anywhere near on the radar. The other piece of advice actually came from a colleague early in my career when I first began, way back, covering politics in Baltimore. I heard there was a boss in Baltimore politics back then named Jack Pollock, and a guy named Arlen Specter was running, and I had heard that he was getting Jack Pollock's support, even though Specter claimed to be a reformer. So I called up Specter and I said, "Is Jack Pollock paying for part of your campaign?" He said, "No way." So I went to another reporter who had covered politics for a long time, and I told him conversation. He said, "You asked the wrong question. You should have asked, are you paying Jack Pollock?" And he was right. I called up Specter. I said, "I feel really stupid, but are you paying Jack Pollock?" And he went, "Well, yes." And I learned how the directions worked.
Please thank Tom Edsall. You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Elise Manukian, Sienna Barnes, Adam Ailey, and Andrew Stelzer, with a special thanks to the Commonwealth Club. The episode was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Spord is our executive producer. Philip Yun is CEO of World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.